I realize you might immediately disagree with the title of this video, but I am going to tell you why I think Warhammer 40k should be played at 1,000 points. Hey everybody, I'm Matthew from MiniWarGaming.com, and one of the gripes that I've had with Warhammer 40k over the past few editions is the size of the games. I want to talk about four reasons why it's becoming a problem. And I really hope that whenever they do their next edition in the next year and a half, because it seems to be every 3 years, that they will consider changing some of these for the better. The first one is that the points costs have changed dramatically, and the number of models on the table has thus suffered. And I will use the word suffered. Now, this might be the most obvious one, which is why I'm starting with it. We've had a bit of inflation or deflation. Actually, it would be inflation, that the points cost, no, the deflation, I don't know, where the points cost of models keeps generally going down, edition by edition, and even update by update. I've noticed a trend that when Games Workshop makes adjustments to the points cost of units for balance sake, that they tend to favor lowering points costs of units that are too weak over raising the points costs of units that are too good. Now they do both, they definitely do both, but generally we see they lower them more than they raise them. I've seen Steve, who built a 2,000 point Leagues of Votann army, watch with dismay as they put up an update and his 2,000 points literally became 1,500 points. Now you might think, well, obviously Games Workshop is going to do this because they want you to buy more models. But the thing is, it's not actually good for the game itself. It makes the game take longer to play because there are just more models on the table. When I remember comparing at one point to when we used to play 7th edition Warhammer 40k or even 6th edition 40k. We played back then at 1,500 points. That was our standard size games. Tournaments typically did 1,750 or maybe 1,850. I don't know why 1,850 or heck even 1,750. Maybe it was like we're just going to push it up a little bit, so only by like 250 points, whatever it happens to be. But we played 1,500 points all the time on MiniWarGaming, and we generally could get a couple of games done in one filming day. Sometimes we'd have to do a second game at 1,000 points, but for the most part, we could do two 1,500 point games in a filming day. But when I look at the number of models that was in a 1,500 point game, that would be roughly equivalent to 900 to 1,000 points right now, and sometimes even less. And that makes a big difference for the game. The second thing we can talk about, which is not as big an issue, but I'll still put it out there as number 2, which is the scale of the models or the size of the models. They're getting bigger. I'm not sure if you noticed this, but most things were on 25mm bases back in the earlier editions. And the vast majority of models now are no longer on 25mm bases. Even small infantry gets up to 28mm and sometimes up to 32mm. Now, I'll admit, a lot of these models look way better on 32mm bases or 28mm bases, or going from 40 to 50 or even bigger in some cases. They just do. You take the same size Space Marine, and even though he's not as big as his Primaris brothers, and you take him off a 25mm base and put him on a 32mm base, he all of a sudden looks a lot bigger. And it gives you a bit more wiggle room on the base size for messing with different kind of cool basing materials that you can use. And then you got like the Necron warriors who, back when they were on 25mm bases, their toes always poked over them. So now that they're on 32mm sizes, they actually fit properly. Or like Gene Stealers with their big arms and tentacles and their scything talons, which always got in the way of things. Now they have bigger bases and that's not as big an issue. So that has led to another interesting problem, which is that now that we're having more models on the table and they're on bigger bases, that they're taking up more space on the table, thus kind of closing the distance between everything and filling up the table even more. Now, I have no problem with the models going on bigger bases and models also getting bigger. Even the Imperial Guards are much bigger than they used to. Pretty much everything is bigger than it used to. The vehicles are bigger, the models are bigger, the base sizes are bigger. But that brings us to number 3. The size of the tables are getting smaller. Now they don't have to, and maybe this is going to be the big point of the entire video, which is that none of this has to be the case, because you can still choose to play at 1,500 points or at 1,000 points, which I think is optimal. But the size of the table, this one really bothers me. It really bothers me. It really bothers me. Back in 8th edition, before 8th edition actually, the standard size table was typically 6 feet by 4 feet. Maybe you'd play smaller games on 4 feet by 4 feet, but most people played their games on a 6 foot by 4 foot table. Why that's the standard, I don't know who made it the standard, but it was the standard for quite a while. Or sometimes they would even recommend playing on an 8 foot by 4 foot, but we all played on 6 by 4s. And we're playing 1,500 point games that are equivalent to 1,000 point games right now. But now we come 8th edition, and what do they say in the rule book? Recommended minimum size table, 44 inches by 60 inches. So that's 5 feet by a little less than 4 feet, like 3 3/4, I think it is. So we've gone from 6 by 4 to a 5 by less than 4. And by the way, we recommend 2,000 points, which was already higher than the earlier editions. And we're going to make the bases bigger and the models bigger. And we're going to overall lower their points cost so that you're bringing even more models, not just because there's more points, but because they're cheaper. And the reason, of course, that they wanted to suggest these smaller table sizes is because they came out with a game called Kill Team. And that Kill Team mat that they were selling was, I guess it would be 22 by 30 inches. And if you bought 4 of those and lined them up, that would be 44 by 60. Now I understand, even if I don't like it, why the Kill Team mats are roughly 22 by 30 inches. And that's because the game of Kill Team or Warcry or these different games is designed to kind of be able to fit on your kitchen table or at a lunchroom table where you're maybe don't have as much space to play. And that's really cool. I understand that. It makes total sense. Even if I prefer games on bigger tables, like even skirmish size games on at least 3 by 3, if not 4 by 4, even if there's only a handful of models, I still understand why he designed it that way. But then to say, so now we recommend that the tables are 4 of these Kill Team mats. First off, it doesn't look good if you just grab 4 Kill Team mats and put them together. It just doesn't, okay? So you need a full-size mat that's 44 by 64 to look good. But you have to understand with players, and I'm talking to people who are thinking about rules development, so players are going to follow your suggestions as if they are gospel. When they see we suggest a minimum size of 44 by 60, they will say, it is now official that we play at 44 by 60. And you might think, oh, no, my friends and I, we play still on 6 by 4s, and that's great. Not everybody is going to do this. But we noticed, and when we hit 8th edition, I remember reading that and saying, oh, they say minimum recommended size, because I saw all sorts of people saying on the internet, oh, Games Workshop shrunk the size of the table. And then I read it and said, no, they didn't. They said suggested minimum size. So 6 by 4 is still fine for that size game. But then we started posting battle reports, and we kept getting comment after comment after comment saying, you're doing it wrong. That's too big a table. The game is now designed to play on 44 by 60 because there's problems. If you play on a bigger table, it's easier to deep strike. It changes how far the strategic reserves come in. So the game was designed to play on a 6 by 4. Maybe you're right, or sorry, 44 by 60. Maybe you're right, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the rules designers did not think necessarily about the difference of a couple of inches here and a few inches there and how that would impact how quickly strategic reserves could arrive or how much space there was for deep striking. Maybe they did, maybe I'm wrong, but I strongly suspect that that is not the case. That instead, they're just designing the game as they normally do. They're play testing it and trying to make as good rules as they can. And then they look at it and somebody somewhere says, hey, we sell these mats. We should suggest that the smallest table size not be 6 by 4, but be 4 of these mats. What's worse than that is they suggest that if you play a 1,000-point game, that you only have it on 2 of these mats. So instead of it being 44 by 60, it's 44 by 30. Even smaller. And I'm saying that the game should be played at 1,000 points, and I'm going to tell you, you should play it at 1,000 points on a 6x4 table, or 44 by 60 is perfectly fine as well. I've played plenty of 40K and AOS now in 44 by 60. It's fine. I've gotten used to it. It's a perfectly fine table size. It's just in combination with all of these things, models getting bigger, points cost going down, the suggested game size going up, and people treating it now that they have to play at 2,000 points. And I'm saying this has got to stop. That brings me to my 4th point of the problem with 40K and the number of points that you're playing the game at, maybe. And that is the complexity of the game has gotten much, much higher. It used to be way simpler. There were hardly any rerolls, so rolling wasn't roll to hit, reroll some ones, roll to wound, reroll or reroll some wounds, roll a save, feel no pain, all this different stuff. There wasn't that many rolls. And there were less dice on top of that. It was a big deal if something had 2 attacks. Now it's like whatever that has 2 attacks. So now we have models having more attacks. We have more rerolls. We have more interactions. None of these are a bad thing on their own, by the way. I just want to point that out. I'm not trying to say that rerolls are bad or extra attacks are bad or that stratagems. So you have to kind of think, oh, what stratagems do I want to use when they target my models? What kind of reactions do I want to take? What order of operations do I want to do these things? None of that's a problem. Those are all good things. The complexity going up is not in and of itself a bad thing for 40K. I think it's fine. I think the game is actually good. If you put aside just the repetitive nature of match play and you play narrative, which is like a whole other video, the game is great. It's a lot of fun. Is it balanced? Not perfectly, not anywhere near, and that's okay. Have fun with it. But when you add in all these aspects that make the game take longer, well, that brings me back to the title of this video, which is 40K should be played at 1,000 points, standard. So let me talk about some exceptions to this. I think 1,000 points works really well because when you play it and you don't bring anything that's too big, so nothing, I'm not going to give a perfect number, but maybe nothing over no individual model worth more than a couple hundred points. So no big monsters or big tanks, things like that. I don't actually have a rule in my head of what that number is. It's more a general feel of what you're looking at. So like when I'm doing my Tyranids, you don't see me bringing a Hive Tyrant usually at 1,000 points. I'll have the army led by maybe as big. I had a Turvagon in one of them, but a Turvagon, even though it's big, is way lower power level than a lot of other monsters, and it's more a utility monster. So it's not like a hard and fast rule that you can't have big monsters. It's just more like the look and feel of the whole army. That is more troops, that's actually a lot of models still at 1,000 points, that you're not focusing on hyper elite. You're trying for a more rounded looking army. But the exceptions to this. Now I would definitely 100% say that the exceptions to this would be if you want to bring big chunkier units. So Imperial Knights obviously don't play at 1,000 points, but a whole other video that I don't think Imperial Knights should even be a faction in the game because they're too expensive per model, but that's a whole other thing. Or if you're, by the way, if you're playing Custodes, still works fine at 1,000 points. Maybe you'll want to do min squads instead of max squads though, just to kind of have more stuff going on. But you could definitely scale up the points if you're just adding bigger things. So for example, if we both built a 1,000-point list using this kind of force restrictions of not having anything big, and then say, okay, now let's go up to another 500 points, but you can only add 2 more models. So you add 1 or 2 monsters or vehicles. And then if you want to scale up to 2,000 points, you kind of do the same thing. Or maybe you'll like take one of those elite units and max out the unit instead of adding something else. The idea is that you roughly try to keep the number of units the same, so the complexity doesn't scale exponentially. But what I often see at the 2,000 point level is spamming the same enormous units over and over again, or just like, I want this unit to be able to do something, so I'll bring 2 or 3 of them rather than being restricted to just 1 and having to deal with the fact that you don't get to bring everything all the time and you have to make really hard tactical decisions. And sometimes the game can be a little swingier because, oh, I lost some key unit early in the game, which actually doesn't happen quite as quickly as often because you don't have as many things on the other side of the table to kill you from a distance. And that leads me to the last thing. Even though we're playing at 1,000 points, I still want to play at 44 by 60 at least, if not a 6x4 table. And you also make sure that there's a decent amount of terrain on the table. This allows you actually to bring in more terrain and treat it more like the skirmish game that it kind of used to be in the older editions. I've been doing this more. I've been experimenting more with 1,500 points and 1,000 point games, and I have found no reduction in funness. In fact, I would say quite the opposite, that I'm having more fun with 40K now than I ever have, ever since I reduced how many points we play to often 1,000, sometimes 1,500, and also focus on more narrative scenarios rather than match play. But that's more a personal preference, which you might think, well, so is the 1,000 point thing. And I agree to that. I understand that there is a subjectivity to it, but I'm trying to prove objectively why the game should be played at lower points, even as low as 1,000. Because once again, as a recap, points have gone down, the size of the models has gone up, the size of the table has gone down, and the complexity of the game has gone up. So playing at 2,000 points is definitely something you can do, but you have to expect the game to take way longer than it ever used to. And it definitely shouldn't be the norm, I would think, at tournaments or at narrative events. 1,500 points max. That way you can have more stuff going on, can have more games, and have more time in the case of narrative events. So you have that downtime between games to upgrade your rosters and to mingle with other players as well, and just have it more of a social event. That's what I wish they would do for the Grand Narrative. Love that event. Wish it was not 2,000 points. 1,500 points, that's what I would actually do 1,000 points. The first one was 1,000 points for the most of the event. Tons of fun. And then ramp up to 2,000 at the end is what they did. Loved that. Wish they'd do that every time. But I'm sure a lot of people now have the opinion that you need to play at 2,000 points on these smaller sized tables. It's not the case. So remember, you can break the shackles of having to follow the suggestions in the rules and do whatever you want. But if you're a rules writer, this is a bit of a warning that if you suggest something in your rules, most likely the majority of people will take that as these are the rules, because they don't want to have to figure out all these house rules and stuff. I totally get that. I completely understand it. So it's really the responsibility of the rules writers to give these people these options in the rules very explicitly. Not just say, here's what you play at 1,000 and here's what you play at 2,000. It's like, no. Why didn't you explain what you do at 1,500 points? You should have, because if you don't, people will not think of that as a points level of the game, and they won't play at it, and your game will actually suffer because of it, and people will complain more about your game, because really the problem is that they're playing with too many models and too much complexity, and maybe the same match play scenarios over and over again. There you go. That's my video essay on why you should be playing Warhammer 40K at 1,000 points. Let me know what you think. Happy wargaming.